On the Dreamcast, I am the greatest technological contrivance in all of human history. You know, this video was supposed to be released over a year ago, but a lot has changed between now and then. Some of the channel content has been different, and Rolfus was able to finish Shenmue 1 and 2 in that time period, and wow, time management, huh? But hey, you guys clicked on a video about the Dreamcast, so you're pretty alright in my book. So sit back, relax, enjoy this weird theme song Rolfus wrote, and enjoy some of the best examples of technology ever developed on the Dreamcast.
Sorry about that, everybody. If you guys have ever owned a Sega Dreamcast, you'll know that it is a very loud and proud and boisterous sort of system that will randomly make noises for you in the middle of playing, just to let you know that you are indeed playing a Sega Dreamcast.
I'm a Dreamcast!
Yeah, so there might be interruptions like that here and there throughout this video, but anyway, I'm Jordan Rolfus from Beagle Rampant Productions, and welcome to our Dreamcast Nerdinalia, the series where we nerd out and have fun about all sorts of fun, crazy, nerd-type topics and the like. If you guys haven't checked out my Sega Saturn Nerdinalia, I recommend taking a look at that video before jumping into this one, because knowing what Sega was going through towards the end of the Saturn's life cycle is very important to understand what's going on with where they were coming from in the development of the Dreamcast and the eventual release of the Dreamcast, the follow-up console to the Saturn. Basically, at 1998, the Sega Saturn had pretty much been done in by the Sony PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. It enjoyed a good deal of success in its home market of Japan, but with the release of the N64 and the release of the PlayStation, the Saturn just wasn't able to hold up, and the Saturn was never really as popular over here in the West as it was in Japan anyway, so Sega decided to go ahead and go a different route for the upcoming Dreamcast system. So we had a little bit of changes of leadership. Over in Japan, we now have Mr. Shoichiro Irimajiri running the show, and over here in the West, we had Mr. Bernie Stoller heading operations. And their vision for Sega's next console was one that was compact, very easy to use, and very cost-effective. And ultimately, they certainly do get that with the Dreamcast. And in 1998, November of 1998, the Dreamcast is launched in Japan to a meh kind of reception. In fact, the situation was so grave that people reported they were returning their Dreamcasts in exchange for Sega Saturn consoles, games, and accessories, and even for some PlayStation products. So this was a very awkward situation for Sega to be in. They were in dire financial straits with the failure of the Saturn, and this new console that was supposed to bring them into the next century, the new millennium, and help them out of their financial woes, wasn't really taking off in their late November 1998 release in Japan. So the brilliant Sega marketing team, the geniuses behind the Segata Sanshiro ads, decided that they needed a new approach, a new character, interesting story arc to go ahead and mobilize the population and get them wanting to buy the Dreamcast.
As well they should, because I'm awesome.
Yes, indeed, Dreamcast, you certainly are awesome. So they decided to enlist the help of their managing director, Mr. Hidekazu Yukawa, to go ahead and do a small little ad campaign to sort of showcase how fun and wacky the Dreamcast is. Ironically, you don't see too much actually about the Dreamcast in these ad campaigns, but it reflects the sort of vast story arc mentality that Sega had at this time. And of course, Mr. Yukawa was not a professional actor, but he was a good sport about the whole series. And I gotta tip my hat to Mr. Jim Ballard, who uploaded a fabulous translation of all of these commercials. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the first commercial. We won't take a look at the whole ad campaign. We'll take a look at the key components of the story arc here. The first one is particularly interesting. Yukawa sees all these kids talking about how great Sony and PlayStation is.
I see they let the kids sniff glue these days, huh?
Yes, Dreamcast. Anyway, yeah, he sees the kids talking smack about Sega, his own company isn't behind him, and he gets beaten up for reasons? I don't know, it seems like kind of an extreme measure to beat someone up just because they run the unpopular Sega, but let's take a look at the first ad here.
その日、セガエンタープライゼス専務湯川秀和は驚くべき街の声を耳にした。セガなんてダッセよな。プレステの方が面白いよな。
そうなのか。なんてこった。止めてくれ。一人になりたいんだ。
セガなんてダッセよな。
ちょい。うるせえ。ごめんなさいよ。
おかえりなさい。どうなさったの？
立つんだ、湯川専務。
So in the next ad we're going to be taking a look at, the Dreamcast is launched and it is a major hit. And I gotta say, I just love how Yukawa goes, yes! Like every time I get a new subscriber, yes! And it's a rare event when I get a new subscriber, so it's a profound yes! Or like, there's a special on Arby's curly fries, yes! Or, I don't know, other good things. Fun things are coming in the mail. Yes! Or I'm going to shut up and actually show you this ad. Yes!
落ち込んでいた湯川秀和についに朗報がもたらされた。
専務、ドリームキャスト完成しました。そうか。ありがとう。ご苦労さん。できたよついに。
おめでとうございます。
勝負はこれからだがな。
お赤飯炊いときますから早く帰ってきてね。これでもう CM に出なくていいわね。
うん。
なんだよ、お前知らねえのかよ。ドリームキャストってすげえんだぜ。
よしよしよし。行きたいと思います。それでは専務どうぞ。
進め、湯川専務。せや。
So in the next ad on this interesting campaign, they enlist the help of teen sensation Hideaki Takizawa. Now, before I watched these videos and before I was developing this video, I had no idea who Takizawa was, so I did some Google searching and comes to find out he's a sort of teen heartthrob that does songs, he does some television dramas, a movie here or there. And I stumbled upon his fan page, and I went from knowing nothing at all about this guy to knowing him very, very intimately. Let's just say I know his body better than I know my own. And y'all Takizawa fans, y'all are sick, man. But anyway, this is a very funny ad with Yukawa and Takizawa, and I love the exchange of business cards gag here. I mean, it could probably explain why I'm not so successful, because not only do I not have any functioning business cards at the moment, I certainly don't have 85 of them.
湯川君、ついにドリームキャストが発売される。
は、ついては草の根販売計画を滝沢君とやってもらいたい。滝沢と言いますと営業二課の？いやいや、タレントの滝沢君だよ。は？
よろしくお願いします。
それから88枚の名刺が交換され、計画は実行された。
ドリームキャストいかがですか？
おじさん普段何やってんすか？
専務。
専務がなんで？
なんでだろう。ドリームキャストいかがですか？
いいのかなこれで。
Dreamcast!
Of course, once Yukawa and Takizawa team up, okay, people aren't so interested in Yukawa selling them a Dreamcast. Do you want the old nerdy businessman selling you a Dreamcast? Or do you want the heartthrob Takizawa? So in the next commercial, Takizawa just thumbing through a book at a bookstore, comes across the secret of depression in elderly people, and he mobilizes all of Japan to get them ready to buy some Dreamcasts.
はい。
すいません、ちょっと。
間に合ってます。しつこいわね。
すいません。
あら、滝沢くん？
売れましたよ、3つも。
そうあいつ一人でやれんだよ。
中高年のズベは危険か。そうだ、皆さんお願いがあります。リアカーを引くこのおじさん見かけたら専務一つくださいと言ってあげてください。
ドリームキャストいかがですか？
専務一つください。
はい。
Dreamcast!
By this point, the ad campaign is rather successful in Japan, and Sega is noticing an increase in sales. In fact, shipments are starting to sell out, which was initially what they had hoped for the beginning. A few weeks prior, they wanted, okay, the second this puppy hits the stores, we want it sold out, but that really wasn't happening, so they finally are able to get to that point with this ad campaign, and Yukawa does an apology for the lack of stock of the Dreamcasts, and ultimately he is demoted from his position as managing director. He wasn't really demoted from that position, it's just something they use as a narrative arc there.
売り切れ？嘘！
湯川でございます。この度はドリームキャストの生産が追いつかず誠に申し訳ございません。
なんとかしてよ。
はい、この責任を取りまして私専務を降格となりました。
降格？どうしてあなたが責任取らなきゃいけないの？
なんでだろう。
そんなの関係ない。言ってくれ。
ごもっともでございます。しかし
おじさん、
谷川君、
みんなごめんね。
しょうがねえな。
And playing on this thing, you know, when Yukawa says it, bah, nobody cares. But when Takizawa says something, oh, okay, yeah, it's cool. We'll wait for more Dreamcasts. You know, I just love that play, that fun little relationship they have. Sega's marketing plans were so brilliant in this era in Japan, and I wish some of it came to the West. Granted, we'll look at Western Dreamcast ads in a little bit, and we do a better job with the Dreamcast than we did with the Saturn. But for the final ad, we have a sort of guess who this wash-up person is, and we have managing director Yukawa up there, and all of a sudden Takizawa comes in with a brand new shipment of Dreamcasts, and
It's the best thing that could possibly happen to you!
あなたの潜在意識の彼方に消えた。さあこの方は誰？紅茶キノコの人。
人間ポップ。
残念。この方はあの CM の。
元専務。
今だ、専務。
すいません。皆さん、ドリームキャストが品切れで大変ご迷惑をおかけしましたが、ようやく生産が間に合いました。
ルットンだ。
やったね、専務。
CM です。
あの人の今。
トニコさん。
Dreamcast!
So an interesting little note about Mr. Hidekazu Yukawa. He is featured somewhat in the game Shenmue. If you go to the Tomato convenience shop, you can see his image on some of the products there. And you can also notice him in the Yukawa Takara sushi business. There's a character here, and he seems to be running away. Thank you to Shenmue fans for uploading that there. And yeah, this ad campaign was really successful to get the Dreamcast going in Japan. But even with the success of this ad campaign, the Dreamcast ultimately won't enjoy the amount of success in Japan as it will in the West, which is ironic because they will continue providing games and servicing Dreamcast systems well after its discontinuation, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Over in the West, we decided to do a more dark and ominous approach to Dreamcast advertising in the early days. There was a very real concern with the Y2K problem, the year 2000. We were all so worried that once the new millennium hits, everything would sort of collapse. The computers would think, oh, I haven't been invented yet. Let me go and reset myself. The global financial market took a little bit of a dive, and there was legitimate fear. I mean, when I was a young kid, I was like, why is everyone so excited about this new millennium? Don't we know we're all going to be vaporized? And as it turns out, of course, everything was legitimately fine, but there was a definite fear and mystery of cyber things at Y2K. We really didn't know what was going to happen. And Sega plays upon this on the Apocalypse ad to sort of tease the West like, oh, what is this weird, monstrous sort of thing that's coming to us? So we have the Apocalypse ad here, and there are a fun few things to mention, a few little interesting Easter eggs in this ad, as we're gonna see. So coming up, we can see the thief has a device. I don't know what it is. Something. It probably does something. Who knows? But we can see that there is a square, a triangle, a circle, and an X. Any gamer would recognize these as the face buttons for the Sony PlayStation. Sega doing one of their nice little jabs at their main competitor there. So the katakana script here says Kikuko Electronics, so it's not a big hidden mystery, it's not a Sony will eat your soul or anything like that, just a simple last name running an electronics shop.
We got her!
Hi, Randy.
Well, hello.
It's thinking.
It's interesting to note here at the teaser Apocalypse ad, of course the Dreamcast will be released in the United States on September 9th, 1999, the triple nines, quadruple nines, 9, quadruple nines, 4 nines, yeah, we'll just forget that math whoopsied it there, the quadruple nines there, and we also see the beginning of the ad campaign, It's Thinking. This is real common in the West, the It's Thinking. The Dreamcast is effectively alive, and it's probably smarter than you.
No probably in it.
Thanks, Dreamcast. Anyway, we also see the inside of the mind of the Dreamcast. They refer to it as inside the brain, inside the mind of the Dreamcast. I call it the internal family of the Dreamcast because I'm a little slower than the other kids and I like to call things by their legit wrong name, but we have this really fun, it's pretty much a party inside of your Sega Dreamcast. And we see this sort of ad campaign throughout the beginning life cycle of the Dreamcast. I remember vividly the Space Channel 5 commercial as a kid. We didn't have a Dreamcast when I was real little. I didn't get it until, my adult years, like 6 years ago, but I remember this commercial so vividly because it was so awesome. Take a look.
Game rated T for teen.
Move it, bud.
Come on, y'all! Give it up for Ooh La La! Hey, nice pixels, touch!
Check it out, chicks dig the rump shakers.
Yeah, she's grooving on that!
Gentlemen, need I remind you that the female of the species is our natural enemy?
Hey, get up there! She wants you!
Hey, baby, come to Papa. Oh, heavens.
Bad dancing. It's a killer.
Space Channel 5 on Sega Dreamcast.
It's thinking.
Indeed, Space Channel 5 is one of the masterpieces, the casterpieces, if you will, and I absolutely adore this game. I'm pretty lousy at it, but it's so fun to play, and I love the sort of 1950s Space Sage bachelor pad revivalism that we see. In the late 90s, you had sort of this rekindled spirit for the Space Age, and I absolutely love the style and the theming of Space Channel 5. So on September 9th, 1999, the Dreamcast is released in the United States, and it'll be released in Europe and Australia in the following months. And it is a smash hit. It flies off of the shelves. It is wildly popular. It is a resounding success. The low price tag was a definite appeal for gamers. It was edgy, it was sleek, it was interesting, it could do a lot of things. It looked way better than your PlayStation or your Nintendo 64, so this was a decided must-have, and Western audiences absolutely adored their brand new Sega Dreamcast. So on September 9th, 1999, the Sega Dreamcast is released in my part of the world, and since it's released in my part of the world, why don't we go ahead and take a look at this bad boy. Some of the hardware that we got here. We got, of course, a power button for all your turning on and off needs. We got an open button. Rawr. For all your opening and closing needs. You got 4 controller ports, just like your Nintendo 64, so that's awesome multiplayer action you can have. On the back here, we have the telephone modem line that you can use to connect to the internet. The Dreamcast was one of the major pioneers in online gaming, and of course it can be disconnected, so you can add on a broadband connector with the expansion port, or also some of the homebrew community is developing things like SD cards and things of that sort of nature to plug into your extension port here on the Dreamcast. You have your AV input cable here, and it is important to note that this is a very proprietary AV cable. So your Super Nintendo, your N64 cables, your Saturn cables, your Genesis cables, PlayStation cables, none of that will work on the Dreamcast. You have to use the legit Sega Dreamcast AV cables. I think I was pointing to the power adapter when I said AV cables. AV down here, power adapter here. AV, power. AV, power. And this crazy little thing is a serial bus that can be used to plug this Dreamcast into other Dreamcasts for online multiplayer, and it can also be used for interfacing with your Neo Geo Pocket Color, because apparently there was a demand for that. Let's have this ad explain it a little bit better than I can, if anyone can explain this.
It's here! The revolutionary Neo Geo Pocket Color! With 16-bit power, linked to the Sega Dreamcast. Revolving joystick. 146 color display. 6 cool styles. The graphics will blow you away. Neo Geo Pocket, way ahead of the game.
And one other interesting thing about the Dreamcast. Right here you can see the region code. And you can see that there is a number with a circle in it. If your number is 0 or 1, your Dreamcast is enabled to play backup copies of the games. So you're able to burn the disc off of the computer, burn a CDI file onto a CD-R. You'll want to use a CD-R for this. And your Dreamcast doesn't have any copy protection if your number is 0 or 1. If your number is greater than 1, then your Dreamcast is copy protected, so you would have to get the system modded. But my unit, I'm able to burn all the backup games I want. That's how I was able to get the Illbleed video up that maybe 6 people saw. But that is definitely it would be something of a concern for Sega. Oh, people are able to pirate our games. Keep that sort of in the back of your head as we continue with the story of Sega's Dreamcast here. We also have the innovative controllers for the Dreamcast. You got your face buttons here, you got your directional pad, you got your thumbstick, which is tragically underused for a lot of these 3D games. You got your L and R triggers. Triggers were becoming a major thing with the Dreamcast. You could get the Saturn 3D controller that had trigger buttons on the top, but it became a normal thing here on the Dreamcast. And of course, just one start button, no select button or anything like that. And the really interesting thing we have with the Dreamcast is the visual memory unit. I got a fun Hello Kitty one here from Japan. And yes, a Japanese peripheral will work on an American Dreamcast, so this is an American controller, my console is American, but this VMU is Japanese, and it all works perfectly, and you're able to play games that interfaces with Sonic Adventure to have some mini-games on it. I don't know how to do that, I never tried that. You definitely need to do batteries on this thing. More than likely, you buy a VMU, you'll probably need to change the battery. It's just the standard hearing aid battery, like what you would put in a Sega Saturn unit. The VMUs do not hold a whole lot of information, so you may find yourself going into the menu, cleaning out old games so you can go ahead and create enough blocks for the new ones. I think it's only about a megabyte of storage you can get on one of these. It's pathetic, the amount of storage you can actually get on a visual memory unit there. You can use third-party visual memory units with a lot more storage, but they may not necessarily work with a lot of the mini-games and what have you. And one thing to mention about the save data, all the data saved on the visual memory unit, on the Dreamcast itself, it has a little battery compartment. I think it's kind of in the front here. But you may notice, okay, I turn on my Dreamcast and it thinks it's late November of 1998. This is not a major problem like it is with the Sega Saturn because all the games are being saved onto the visual memory unit. But if you really want to change it, you'll have to open this puppy up and unsolder the battery and solder a new one in, and it's one that I'm too much of a wuss to actually try out. I'm afraid I might catch myself on fire, blow up my Dreamcast, open a portal to another dimension, you know, the usual sort of nonsense there. And a lot of people say, oh, I just bought a Dreamcast off of eBay or at my used game store and the discs aren't running right. Usually what you have to do is open this up, and right on the front of the laser there is a little screw that you can just ever so slightly adjust. And that should be enough to recalibrate everything. And if that doesn't work, you can always just flip your Dreamcast upside down, and that usually works like a charm for me if the Dreamcast isn't behaving himself.
I always behave myself because I'm the greatest technological contrivance ever. What are you doing trying to mess with me, boy? I'm gonna beat you silly.
Dreamcast, I'm already silly, so no need to beat me too much there. And one fun peripheral, the Dreamcast is loaded with peripherals. You have the microphones and rumble packs. And microphones were used for the game Seaman, and rumble packs are, you know, exactly like how they were for the Nintendo 64. They plug into the visual memory unit port. But of course, we also have keyboards for games like Typing of the Dead, and you can also use keyboards, of course, to send emails via the internet, but Typing of the Dead, man, that is a fun time, and all sorts of crazy things that you thought you would never ever have to type. This Hello Kitty keyboard is from Japan. It's a lot smaller and more compact than some of the clunkier American models, and again, this works perfectly with an American Dreamcast, and you can switch one of these buttons, I think it's this one, that like switches between hiragana, katakana, and the kanji, and Yeah, I don't really know the kanji as beautifully as I should, but, yeah, the Dreamcast was filled with all sorts of fun peripherals. There was, of course, a light gun that you could use for your Dreamcast. A lot of those models weren't officially released by Sega in the West, but you can get third-party versions easily enough. There was a Dreamcast camera that was only released in Japan, and it really didn't hold a whole lot of information or anything too interesting like that. I can go ahead and put the Action Replay demo disc inside of my Dreamcast here. Tell it, okay, go ahead, play the game. And then I can swap it out for an import game and go ahead and boot up the Japanese or PAL import. I know they say PAL games shouldn't work on American consoles or televisions, but I've never actually had trouble with that. Weird, huh? But anyway, we can go ahead and import games from other regions using this method. Now, I've heard reports of people potentially damaging their Dreamcast using this disc swap method, so use a degree of caution, use your good judgment. I'm not liable for any damage you might do to your system, but I've been doing this for quite a while and I haven't had any problems. Take that for what it's worth. And you may also run into issues if you are playing a game that spans several discs. The Dreamcast did not use DVD technology as the later consoles willed, the PlayStation, GameCube, and Xbox. I'll get to those in just a little bit here. They used something called the Gigabyte Disc ROM, the GD-ROM. It was a very proprietary method for Sega, and it was, by and large, it was good enough, but it had a quarter of the storage capacity of a DVD, so you may have noticed Shenmue 2 spans several discs on the Dreamcast version. It's only one disc on the Xbox version. A GD-ROM disc contains about a gigabyte, so potentially you could be downloading a game that is bigger than the disc you would like to put it on, and that will give you all sorts of problems when you are trying to run it. But overall, those are the basics of the Dreamcast hardware. I'm sure I'm missing a whole lot of things about it. I mean, it was a very intricate system for the time, and it could do a lot of really great things, and the games were absolutely great on the Dreamcast. It was a very avant-garde and creative system. It is a really fun machine to go ahead and play. I absolutely have a blast whenever I hook up the Dreamcast and get ready for some action there. But even though the Dreamcast was enjoying a good deal of success in the West, it still had trouble within the Japanese market. And if you were to read some of the annual reports from Sega at that era, it kind of reads like the beginning of Virgil's Aeneid, where the city of Troy is burning and things aren't looking too good. But of course, in Aeneas's case, he was able to escape and begin the amazing empire that is Rome, and Sega kind of loses their empire in a little bit here.
Yeah? Says the guy with barely 200 subscribers. You've been at this for how long, Rolfus, and you still can't even garner that much of a support? You're one to talk about empires.
Yeah, I mean, I have a mirror Dreamcast. I know what's up. So we notice, particularly in the United States region, we won't notice this as much in the PAL and Japanese regions, but right at the halfway mark of the system's life cycle, we notice all of a sudden the packaging goes from this white design to a black design, and let me just mention real quickly, isn't it great that Lara Croft is back on Sega? That is awesome. I just love that Lara Croft is back on a Sega console. But anyway, the actual difference between the white cases and the black cases, it's completely negligible. They're the same games, they work just as you would expect them to in a Dreamcast. It's just a change in design and ultimately a change in marketing. The internal family of the Dreamcast, as I am erroneously calling it, doesn't really go away, but it certainly takes a back seat to focusing on the actual games themselves and to focusing on its online capability. We once again had some changes in leadership in Sega, kind of at the halfway mark of the Dreamcast life cycle. Bernie Stoller had been fired and replaced with Mr. Peter Moore in the United States region. And over in Japan, Iri Majiri was outed, and we now have Mr. Isao Okawa as head of the Japanese division, and Okawa's vision was to heavily focus online. And I absolutely adore this Britain is Best At, uploaded by Retro Games Collector. And, I mean, the really weird and awkward Brexit jokes really just sort of write themselves for this commercial. Take a look.
As every true patriot knows, Britain is best. Our class, our history, our cuisine. All of Europe begs us to join them. Why? We go and visit them every summer. For centuries, we have beaten the Continentals. Now, it's time to do them again. Play the Euros head-to-head online through your Dreamcast, and let's show them who's the daddy.
So overall, we see with the Dreamcast, we have the classics, we have the Virtua Fighter, we have Sonic the Hedgehog, we have the newest addition, Big the Cat, because that was what the world needed.
Hold on, Froggy, I'm coming!
We have Echo the Dolphin, we have a new Phantasy Star game. Literally everything is going for Sega. The Dreamcast is doing everything right. However, it just wasn't able to keep up. The annual report was saying, we can't pay the investors their dividends, so this was not a good situation for Sega to be in. They were in dire financial straits after the fall of the Saturn. They needed a console that could do a miracle. They needed a miracle from the Dreamcast, but if they were to price it to a point that was actually profitable, then nobody would want to buy it. So, one thing that especially did not help was the October 2000 launch of the Sony PlayStation. There was indeed a shortage of the pre-orders, and Sega thought, okay, we can go ahead and exploit this glitch. It was a system glitch, people weren't getting their PS2s, and it still didn't matter because people were like, oh no, it's cool, we don't need to buy a Dreamcast, we'll just wait for the PlayStation. So that, in conjunction with the fact that they could not pay dividends to their investors, ultimately led to these decisions of closing up shop in early 2001. It was announced that at March of that year, the Dreamcast would officially be discontinued worldwide. And Peter Moore had mentioned that it was a very rough day. He had to fire a lot of people. It was a hard call to make. But he wanted to ensure that Sega could live on, and that would ultimately mean they would have to cut their losses on the Dreamcast. And Mr. Okawa, to ensure that Sega did indeed have a future, donated nearly $700 million of his personal stocks and assets to the company to fund them for the future. And shortly thereafter, he had died of heart failure. And by March 31st of 2001, the Sega Dreamcast was indeed discontinued. People always like to ask the question, why did the Dreamcast fail? I don't really like that question. I much prefer the question, what killed the Dreamcast right in the middle of its peak performance? And we can attribute this to several factors that I had mentioned. Its low pricing, while good for the consumer, wasn't good to get Sega out of their financial slump from the failure of the Saturn. The fact that it used gigabyte discs wasn't as effective. The technology was a little more primitive and difficult to develop for than it was for the Sony PlayStation. So a developer could look, the PlayStation is coming, the PlayStation 2 is coming, so why don't I just go ahead, develop this for a system that can handle 4 times the amount of data. So, you notice I am making sure to mention that the Xbox was not a major rival for the Dreamcast because the Xbox was released well after the Dreamcast discontinuation. And then the GameCube was released a legit almost year after the Dreamcast discontinuation. And of course, I also have to attribute it to Sega's purchase of Visual Concepts, the sports developer that did NFL 2K. And again, you owe it to yourself to play NFL 2K if you love retro gaming and American football. But by and large, this was a very expensive maneuver that ultimately upset EA Games to basically send the message, okay, we are not going to develop for this system at all. So not only do you lose a lot of sports games, but you also lose a lot of movie licenses, which back in those days, movie licenses were important for your gaming consoles. We don't do it as much these days, but back then, that was a definite must. So all these factors, in conjunction with Sega still heavily focusing on their arcade interests, ultimately led to the Dreamcast being just a not profitable venture for the company. But overall, we owe so much of modern gaming to the developments that we have seen within the Dreamcast. But anyway, I'm Jordan Rolfes from Beagle Rampant Productions. Thank you guys so much for watching. You know you're the best subscribers of any YouTuber on the planet. I'm linking all of the videos that I have borrowed content from down below there. I thank everyone so much for watching and for uploading and saving all of this really awesome Dreamcast history. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on some of those social media links that I'm going to pop down in the description below. You guys know you're the best, and I will catch you with another video at some point. And who knows when that point's going to be. By the way, I love you guys, and you're the best.